Hi everyone, I am so excited to be part of the Multicultural Mental Health Training Conference because it's such an important part of what the work that we do here. Hola Teresa, I know you are there, and hi Naomi, and thank you. I just want to start off by thanking the team that put this whole piece together because I think it's so important, and I know that we've already been having a lot of conversations around mental health treatment, mental health management, mental health pieces with regards to immigrants and refugees. And so as the Multicultural Council of Fort Wayne takes this move towards creating these conversations, space where we can all be there to learn, educate each other, and continue to provide services to our clients that we see on a day-to-day basis. And I know they've already done an introduction of who I am, and I know a lot of you know me from the community. And I am still here. I love whatever is going on in the community, and I try as much as I can to be part and parcel of all the conversations that pertain to the well-being of immigrants and refugees. And it's also a personal journey as well for me, being an immigrant from Zimbabwe. The challenges that I have experienced myself, and then getting to a place where you realize you can only be as helpful to yourself if you are engaged, you are part of those processes, and also in that process help others as much as you can. And so my topic, my presentation is going to be specifically on a culturally aware and religiously sensitive approach to mental health. And I wanted really to focus on what is it that we term my community. Because for me, my community is everyone I interact with and those that I do not interact with as well. And how that plays into how we manage and also provide treatment for our clients who come through our doors, or even as families work together in their communities. How do they have that conversation so that that conversation gets to where treatment is available to them, and that treatment should be in line with their beliefs, their cultural languages, and so on and so on. So this is where, and I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that when I am speaking and doing this presentation, it's out of just experience. Not that I have any clinical background in terms of how to provide treatment plans and so on, but it's out of doing case management and observing. And one of the biggest tools that I believe I have utilized over my time when I worked with a local agency here in Fort Wayne was making observations of communities that I worked with. Not only using the tools that I've learned in school, because I did go to school here, my background is in psychology, but to also utilize what are those things that are in the community, in these communities that are informal, that can also help in the process of wellness for our clients. And so without further ado, I'm going to be flipping through my PowerPoint. And so I've also prepared a one-page, I guess, kind of like a PowerPoint, one-page back-to-back for you guys to follow through with the PowerPoint as well as I'm going through, as I'm recording it right now. So what's important is that, if you have any questions, because I'm going to be at the panel of discussion. So if you have any questions with regards to some of the things that I'm going to share now, I would like for you to write on those on the pieces of paper and material that has been provided to you, and so that we can continue to have this conversation. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody who signed up to be part of this process, because it's really needed. It's very, very important, because a community cannot be well when part of its community is not taken care of. And so as we come together this way, we are saying we are part of just not only our community of work, but we are part of the larger community. And so we are looking at it from a holistic approach where we are all connected in that way. Okay, so I'm just going to flip over. So I'm going to start off with objectives that we are going to be focusing on. And I will encourage you as I go over some of these objectives. You have to prepare your own personal objectives for your clients, because it's very, very important when you work with clients, as much as you have a general I guess, shared ideas in the organization of what you want to achieve with your clients. I always recommend to say, as a provider, also make those personal recommendations, observations, objectives for your single or families that you work with, or just clients in general. And so that as you work with them, you achieve the level of wellness that's very suitable to just specifically the families that you're working with. So it's very, very important to be very objective driven. And so that gives us evaluation tools. It gives us a way to assess how much we've made progress with our clients. So for today's presentation, what I put down is our objectives for the presentation. The first one I feel strongly about is that we must identify, how do we identify how mental health is interpreted amongst immigrants and refugees. And so when we say immigrants and refugees, because of the nature of the topic, because I am not a big fan of labels, because sometimes labels can also be part of that traumatic journey. I want to say this because I've had so many conversations with a lot of friends and just clients as well. Just the idea of being labeled a refugee brings a lot of trauma as well, and sometimes we might not realize it. So it's always important for us to be to be aware of all these things, and that's how we become sensitive and culturally aware of what are those aspects that really define who we are serving. And so for the purpose of our presentation, I will use those terms because that is the title that we have. But my encouragement is that when we work with clients, we want to make sure that we are speaking in terms of not labeling, but more to say, how can we help somebody who is coming with a different view of what we as Americans look at in terms of mental health. How the person looks at it from a cultural perspective. What is their culture? What is their religion? Very, very important, because through the lenses of the people that we serve, that's how we can understand how their interpretation of mental health is. So that's very, very important. And then define the different immigrant groups, populations within our communities. And so it goes back to the title of my presentation. My community, what does the community really mean? I know that we tend to use that term a lot, but what is it? What is the composition of a community? Community, does it mean individual communities, or does it mean my work community? But a larger community, what does that look like? And so as we work with our clients, we must be able to define the different groups. And so when we define different groups, we also must go down to the ethnic groups, the different tribes, whether they're coming from countries where tribes are prominent. It's very, very important for us to understand that, because each particular ethnic group, each tribal group has different practices with regards to how they treat mental health, if it at all is understood in those communities, and how do we as providers help our clients, help our the families that we are working with to process whatever information we are bringing to them, so for them to get the best treatment they can. Identify some informal methods. I'm a big fan of that, and I know maybe some people might not be, but I do really think there's a emphasis that has to be also put in finding ways of incorporating informal methods of dealing with mental health. And we can use the clinical piece as well, because as providers, we have the body of knowledge. And so we have to use that body of knowledge creatively. And so sometimes the informal way of treating mental health can be incorporated with what we have formalized in terms of the education, the theory of education, like I mentioned. So it's always important as we work with our clients to look into those informal parts of treatment. They might not look as treatment to us, but we must be observant. We must observe those attitudes and behaviors that actually promote wellness in our clients. And so how do we incorporate those informal methods into the body of knowledge that we've already acquired through education or any other ways that we've acquired our skills to be able to provide these services? Identify how to build safe bridges between culture and services. And I put a big emphasis on safe, because a lot of times we look at safety as in a place where we cause no harm. That's definitely one of the explanations, because when families come to us, they are looking to us to make sure that we are providing services that do not provide harm or additional harm to them. So the space that we provide for our clients has to be safe in terms of, are they being accepted from their cultural expectations? Are we looking at treatment through their religious lenses? And so how do we then have that conversation where we, our clients, we are observing what's truly important in their cultures, in their religion, in their ways of lives, in their different communities? And because if we lose that connection where we are getting an opportunity to build a relationship with our clients, sometimes the services we might provide might not bring the wellness that we are expecting, or we are, hoping that our clients might get from our services. So it's always important, because clients, we are observing, how they are interacting with us. They are always also doing the same thing. And so if you're somebody, I know for me personally, if I go to a doctor's visit, just a simple doctor's visit, and if I observe the doctor is not in interaction with me from how I perceive a doctor from a cultural perspective, I feel like I've not visited the doctor. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I went to my doctor because of a neck injury I have. And so when I got there, he looked at me and then assumed a lot of things. And so he started asking questions that were not relevant. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable. But at the same time, my cultural person, from being a Zimbabwean, I could have been rude to say, please respect my space. But for some reason, because I grew up knowing a doctor, just like the police, we give respect to them. And so when somebody puts you in a position of where you are not sure whether to be abrupt with them in your response or you want to be respectful, I took a moment, and I remember going back into my car just feeling so horrible for not being able to confront this doctor to say, I really think you're being disrespectful. But because of the cultural piece, it limited me from moving forward to actually mention, to actually just say to him, I don't think you are being appropriate here. But I chose to continue on in that visit, even though I felt very disrespected. And so you can imagine, for somebody like me, I don't purport to have a lot of experience, but I've worked in this community for a while now. And a lot of you know me not being somebody who is shy of saying things and so on. So imagine a client who comes to you. The language is not, at par, is expected, the language skills, so we will need an interpreter. And even just the idea of sharing, and they're coming to us knowing, this is a place where I'm going to get wellness. So there's an amount, respect given to the provider. So be aware of the hat that you wear. And so being aware of it allows you then to have that conversation with your client to make them comfortable so that they're able to share with you. And so it's very, very important to create those safe bridges. And so with those safe bridges, we're also going to be talking about some of the things that you might do within an organization to help you not so much achieve totally, but at least making those steps to make sure that the space that you provide for services is a safe one. And so safety should not be looked in just one aspect, but looking at it in terms of, is the place that they come to visit, if it's an office, is it culturally sensitive? Is it religiously sensitive? What materials do we have? What languages do we have? And what kind of space do you meet with them that they feel it's a comfortable and safe environment? Do they feel judged, or do they feel they are part of the process of their of their wellness? And so it's very, very important, because a lot of our families, coming from the different backgrounds that we are going to be talking about, the idea of engaging in conversation about their own wellness is almost a far-fetched idea. So us as providers, we have a responsibility to bring this conversation in so that our clients or families feel that safety in our presence and know that they are part of that treatment plan, so that it's not a foreign agent to them, but they are actually responsible of it, and we have to be creative in terms of how we engage our clients in that respect. And so I'm not going to define culture because I had it here on my PowerPoint, because I know a lot of you have done a lot of cultural awareness, sensitivity activities, and also some of you are coming from organizations where it's part of your day-to-day conversation in the office with clients and so on. And so culture includes a whole bunch of things. It includes your dress, includes the languages, it includes the food that you eat, anything, your beliefs, your perception of time, perception of things, very, very important. And one of the things I love about the definition that I had here is the idea of perception of time. And I will explain further when we go down the PowerPoint why that is important when you work with clients who will look at time in a different aspect from you. And so you as a provider, you have a set time that you're going to meet with them, and they come and they want to meet with you. How do we work around that? How do we work together with our client to make sure that that time piece is, we are culturally sensitive, and at the same time we are also allowing the relationship to build between our clients and us, so that they're able to understand the importance of why time, when you set a certain time to meet with them, and then let's say a session ends because they're coming to you for mental health counseling. I'm just giving an example here. So how does that look like? Because if you have, let's say, 45 minutes and somebody comes in, they think maybe they are going to be there with you for an hour or even more, or 2 hours. So how do we have that conversation? So taking those steps, bit by bit, is very, very crucial in making sure that the families that we work with feel appreciated, feel that they are part of that conversation about their wellness. Okay. So the question is, we start off for us to understand the families that we work with. And so again, going back to the topic at hand, which is working with immigrants and refugees to address trauma and all other mental health issues that they might be presented, on their arrival. And I remember probably maybe 2 years ago, a good friend of mine, Dr. Amy Nitsa, she did a presentation for us at work. And one of the things that I found very interesting was that she spoke of the fact that, this is material, it's not material, but she had done a lot of research. And so she brought some research that was done through Harvard University, where, research was done with regards to when is the most trauma felt with refugees. So specifically refugees, because you have immigrants who are coming with different, different routes and so on. So I'll explain that much further as well. So one of the questions was, yes, we have people who have come as refugees, and by the time they come to Fort Wayne or wherever they are settled, they would have gone through many different countries. And my conversation with her has always been, and I always have the same conversation, and I even had it this afternoon actually. And so one of the conversation I had was, we have to, when we provide mental health treatment, we have to understand those journeys. Because when I cannot even imagine when I am persecuted in my country and then I go into a different country, and probably before I get to my final destination, I would have gone maybe to 3, 4, 5 different countries. So each country has its own different governance or way of governing itself. And so even though all these countries are part of that Geneva Convention, which I'm going to explain in a bit right now, it does not mean that the way they govern or take care of refugees or people who've been, quartered into their countries is the same as everywhere else, because the treatment is different. And so my point I'm trying to make is that, so for each time our families have moved from different countries to the next before arriving to the US or Fort Wayne, to be specific here, they have had to build different survival skills for each different country, because the needs are different. So when you create all these different survival skills, it means also that's traumatic So you're constantly, your brain is constantly bombarded with change, 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 but not feeling the sense of belonging. And so it's very, very important to understand those journeys. And so when we take time as providers to listen to these stories, we realize sometimes there's so much. There's not even just one traumatic event that has happened to our families, because a lot of times you hear that, oh, you know, these things are so generalized. And yet, sometimes if we take time, we might realize that it's not a general piece we need to be working on. We need to work with our clients where they are at, because they have already had so much resilience right through their journey from one country to the next before their final destination. And so going back to the idea of a resettlement, Dr. Nitsa's sharing of this research that was done at Harvard was that they found out that resettlement, settling in the final destination home, was the most traumatic event reported by a lot of refugees. And you can only imagine, and I'm sure some of you are thinking, wow, they should be feeling safe and so on. But it means then they have to acquire a new kind of survival skill. So that in itself is traumatic. And so settling people does not mean that, oh, everything is okay, now people can live happily ever after. No, there's still a whole lot of work to be done. Because I used to do a lot of trainings also to show people how much time people are given to resettle. You know, Catholic charities, if there are people from Catholic charities, they will probably maybe share with you, you know, how much time is given when people are being resettled for them to be in a job, have a good accommodation before they start paying back to the government all the different things, you know, their visas and so on and so on. Because there's always this assumption that these things are coming for free. No, they are not free. Because when refugees are settled, within that period of time that is required by the government, they have to pay back all these things. So the pressure to do that, and also the pressure to make to get acculturated into a new society, and if they've been in different parts of the world that are not as modern as the United States of America, it also means there's also that huge culture shock of technology, driving, getting on the bus, and I've not even started talking about language, just the language piece alone. How do I even get a job? How do I even get to get my kids into school? How do I get to complete my kids' forms at school? Or how do I even interact with my neighbor just to ask for help? And so there's so much. And so the training for resettlement is not that long. And so most of the time people are left to pretty much create a new survival piece to help them through the process of resettling. So that's very, very important for us to remember, that when we have people come in, there's a whole lot of stuff to do. And we have to be inquisitive. We have to be critical thinkers in terms of thinking, why then is resettlement considered the most traumatic event of refugees when they are settled in wherever they are settled? And this is not a study that was just done in the US, but it was done in many parts of the world, like Canada, Australia. They've done these researches, and the researches have shown that the results are the same. There's a higher percentage where it shows when refugees are settled, that is when the most traumatic piece is actually realized. And so we have to probe more. We have to understand why this is. And then so our treatment now for our clients is also going to be looking at that piece. So it doesn't mean that you take away the cultural piece, because remember, when people have left their homes, running away from persecution or whatever situation that is happening, war and so on in their countries, the one thing they hold on to dearly is culture and religion. And so we have to be aware of that. And then now we put in the dynamic of what are those things that are triggers to a place where when resettlement becomes the biggest traumatic event for them. What does that really mean? And how can we create tools or have tools that are going to be able to source this from our clients, and how then do we engage them into a situation where they are part of that wellness in terms of resettling, and what are those stresses that are around them to help the support in terms of getting where they need to be for wellness. And so when we talk about resettlement, we have to always understand that the United States of America is part of the convention that was signed in 1951, I believe, where governments decided if we have countries where there's war or people are persecuted because of their beliefs and so on, we have to open our borders. Because the question always comes, why do people come here? And so people not understanding. Of course, with immigrants, you have immigrants who come for opportunities available, and then those who did not choose to come, but because of circumstances in their countries. And so from a human rights perspective, this is why this convention was signed in 1951, to say those countries that are considered safe places must be part of that process of opening up their doors to bring in people in, so that they can feel the safety of their family, their lives and everything. So that's the reason why we receive people coming in as refugees, so that it's not a question where we feel, oh, why can't they be going elsewhere? It's not a question of choice, but it's more of the fact that we are part of that global human race, where we say, if my brother and sister in a different country, then we might not look the same, we might not sound the same, we might not walk the same, if you want to say so. But the purpose of us being part of that Geneva Convention is to make sure that we provide the human rights piece in terms of opening up our doors. And so when people come, there's the general obligation of each nation to make sure that freedom to practice religion is exercised, so people cannot be persecuted again when they come here, and so persecuted because of what they believe in. It must be part of that general obligation for a country. And the reason why I touch on this particular one, I'm not a politician, and maybe I am to some extent, but the reason why I say this is because as we work with our clients coming from the immigrant and refugee community, we have many different faiths that are practiced in many of our communities. We have people from the Muslim faith, we have people who practice Buddhism, we have people from the Hinduism practice, and so on and so on. And so as providers, part of that observing everyday life of our clients is also observing what the environment is communicating to our clients. So if we have a situation where a Muslim family feels persecuted because of maybe of things that are happening in the world today, how do they look at us when they come through our offices looking for, let's say they're coming for mental health treatment? How do they look at us? How do they see the world? How do they feel now in an environment where there is almost a feeling of persecution? It's very important, because you have to understand that when these things are happening, they are part of that traumatic journey with your clients. So if we are not aware of what the environment is speaking to our clients, we will lose focus of what we need to be building in terms of wellness for our clients. So it's very, very important to be observant of what the community, what the neighborhood looks like, what the environment politically looks like for our clients. Let them be the ones to define that to you, especially when you get an opportunity to build a relationship with them during your treatment plan with them, and so on and so on. Let them help you understand their world and how it creates trauma, and just on top of a different kind of trauma. So it's very, very important for us to have those conversations, because if we lose that piece, we might not be able to get to some of the places. And so, like we said, people who come as refugees, it's either by war, famine, natural disasters, unemployment, persecution, economic hardships, lack of opportunity, poor education, civil arrest. So many, many different things. It's not just, this is not in the whole list of why people come as refugees, but there's so much. If we take that journey to have conversations and hear and listen to our clients' stories, you'll be amazed how much you'll be able to create creative tools to help your clients as you work with them. I have to make sure I have to be observant of time here. I know Nancy, hey Nancy, I can see you're waving at me. Is it time up yet? And so unfortunately, because I cannot do questions at this time, so I'm hoping that you can write questions down, and hopefully when we have the panel discussion this afternoon, you'll be able to ask those questions, and I hope I will have answers for you, because I really truly believe there's no one particular answer, because I only speak from my own experience working with the different communities that I have had the honor to work with for almost 10 to 12 years now. So I'm only sharing my part in this whole piece, and every one of you can create your own part of how you contribute to this piece about wellness for our communities. So who is the immigrant? Who is the refugee? Okay. So my thing is that I look at it, this is my church member, this is a mosque attendee, somebody who is going to the temple, it's a parent, just like all of us, because sometimes I think we remove ourselves when we hear this idea of immigrant and refugee, and that is the reason why I'm not a big fan of titles, or sorry, not titles, but labels like this, because what it does, the mind sets, if we start saying immigrant or refugee, what it does, it removes myself from being part of, and yet I am part of that whole piece, because I'm part of that human race. And so when people are labeled in that way, sometimes people forget these are parents, this is your neighbor, this is your co-worker, these are people who work in the restaurant, these are doctors, your doctors and nurses. The list is endless, because the minute we hear immigrant and refugee, we think of just suffrage, but we don't think of the resilience. We don't think of what skills they bring with them, what intelligence comes along with it, what methods to use in terms of treatment, and how can they be part of that. Yes, we have well-developed DMS, pieces that bring in the mental health definitions, names, and so on, and titles. But there's also the part that informal education, informal pieces come into place, and that's the power a lot of our immigrants bring, immigrants and refugees. They bring all those natural medicines and so on. And I'm not encouraging to say let's use natural medicines, but let's have conversations around that. Let's understand that instead of judging before we even understand what that means, because you have to understand, before people arrived here, they already built so much resilience over time, learned so many skills without having any interaction with a psychologist, a mental health practitioner, or a caseworker, and so on and so on. And if they did, it's mostly probably done in groups, not so much on a one-on-one level. So what it means then is that a lot of people have developed many skills to cope with a lot of issues, whether it's bipolar and so on. So it is our obligation to learn these things, and you might never know where the power of treatment comes from. And I am not encouraging in any way or form that people start, encouraging clients to use, their traditional medicines. But all I am encouraging is that have that conversation, understand what that means, and other methods that have been used to deal with mental health. So very, very important. So know who is the immigrant. Who do we refer to as an immigrant? We are a community of many different people, but who is it that we say is an immigrant? And so think deeply into it to realize that that's your neighbor, that's your nurse, that's your GP, that's anyone. It can just be anybody, okay? So that when we look at it from that humanistic perspective, sometimes it does help take away some of those preconceived ideas about how we work with immigrants, how we work with refugees, because there's always this drive in services where we want to look at services as how do we work with them versus how we work with. Yes, definitely there is an additional skills that we need to work with diverse populations, but we must look at it from just how do I work with my neighbor? How do I work with my GP? Not in the sense of they are your GP or your nurse or anything, but in terms of this holistic look to say these are people who are part of my community. When I'm talking about safety in my community, I'm also talking about these other communities that I might not on a daily basis interact with, but I am part of who they are in the community. Very, very important. So a conversation that must continue for us to have is about understanding mental health, because I find this is my personal view. Mental health is an expression that is loosely utilized, but do we really understand what is mental health? Okay, we understand it from the books that determine the illness and how do you call it, the different mental health pieces in terms of, let's say, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and so on and so on. These different classifications of mental health. But what is really mental health? Okay, we talk of self-care and stuff like that. But what is mental health? And so I have a list of questions, and I also put them down for you on that PowerPoint that I did prepare, a short one for you. And the first one I put down was, is it a Western concept? And mind you, the reason why I put it that way, it's not to in any way provoke any kind of resentment about being a Western concept, but more to have a conversation around it, have a debate around it, understand what in depth are we talking about. So what I did was I put in brackets and said, is it a Western concept? And let's put it in light of how it is perceived amongst diverse communities that may not necessarily identify with Western culture. Okay, very, very important to me when I look at that piece. Because the reason why I say this is because when I look at mental health from my own country as a Zimbabwean, mental health is looked at as a curse, or these are bad spirits. And we have even a specific expression we use when somebody is supposedly suffering from the illness of the mind. That's how they put it, the illness of the mind, not mental health. I don't know if there's a big difference, but they call it the illness of the mind. And this is just an interpretation or translation from probably maybe the English language, but I don't know if it's the most accurate one. But the most accurate expression that has come out of understanding how we look at mental health has been the illness that's being experienced by your mind. And so in a way, what it conveys is that it's either the spirits that are playing up with your mind, or somebody has cursed you to play up with your mind, but it's not mental health. So that's a big difference now when we talk about mental health. And so the expression that we use in my country, we say mental health aswikirwa. And so what that means is that somebody has arrived in your space. And so when you say arrived in your space, in your mental space, so it's already seen as a foreign object that's just coming and trying to cause havoc in your mind. So understanding that, yes, there is definitely you can align that with mental health. But if you're somebody who is very book driven, and if a client like Barbara comes to you, and she doesn't speak English and she's not able to explain to you, and she has a very good interpreter, and the interpreter, as we know, trained interpreters, they have to make sure that they interpret exactly as the way the client has expressed it. And Barbara goes, ashikirwa, and then the interpreter goes, oh, it has arrived and causing havoc in my mind. And so in our description or classification, we might pick a classification in our book of mental health classifications, what that might qualify for. But are we really accurate in understanding the mental health piece with regards to this person? So it's very, very important. And so one of the things that we're going to do some scenarios where I have actual cases that happened here, where pieces of cultural affiliation were assumed to be mental health pieces. And so it became a big debate over that. So we will go over that. Arlene is going to go over that with you, because I might not be back in time to do the activities with you, but Arlene will be doing that with you. Hey, Arlene, I'm so sorry. I'm over here, and I'm sure they had a good time with you at the beginning. And I know they will definitely have an amazing time with you during your presentation, if you are doing it after mine or you're doing it before, either way. So it's very, very important for us to understand that. And then the second one that I have listed there is it hallucination? And again, this is with regards to bad spirits, curses, etc., is understood in a non-Western societies, okay? And which ones are those non-Western societies? And most of our clients that we work with do come from these places where we might consider as non-Western societies because of development or industrialized, whichever expression you choose to use. For me, I just use this because I'm old school and I grew up knowing Western, non-Western. So for some who say industrialized or non-industrialized nations, and so on and so on. Some will say developed or undeveloped countries. It's all up to how you perceive things. And so it's important to kind of like look at it in that respect. So hallucination, because in some situations, some communities might look at mental health as just simply hallucination. And what is hallucination? What is it that they're saying when they say, oh, it's hallucination? But also you have to understand how they express it in their language to come up with a hallucination. And so then you kind of like look at to say, tell me more, or whatever the case may be. If this is a therapeutic session or something like that, you want to understand where they're coming up with this piece about understanding it as hallucination. So it is our job then to go back and kind of like look at, okay, they are bringing this piece, but I am seeing this is a classification for it. But how do I marry what they're saying to me? Bring in these pieces that are considered Western and help the client to get the wellness they need, because a client has to be part of that process. So that conversation allows that to happen. What is the language of mental health as understood by the people we serve or we would like to serve? So the language of mental health, the reason why I'm saying this is that many, I would be surprised if there are a lot of community-based communities or societies that have specific words like the English language or Western cultures have. Let's say, for example, like bipolar or depression or schizophrenia or ADHD or post-traumatic trauma and stuff like that. A lot of the societies, including my own, do not have these specifications. So that is what I mean here by what is the language of mental health. And that is the reason why we need to understand what is mental health, especially if you're going to be working with diverse communities. What does that mean? And so if we are going to be serving them rightfully, we should understand, do they even have languages for these classifications we have? Because we do have, as Western societies have, classifications of bipolar, all these different mental illnesses, but a lot of communities do not have single words to even express that. A lot of times you find expressions that lead on to the mind or something to do with going on in my head, and nothing more, nothing less. So that does not give you a classification, but what it does is that it just gives you that somebody is saying, I'm feeling chaotic somewhere. And the influences of this are coming from maybe a bad spirit that has been cursed upon me, or something else, or somebody is trying to bewitch me, or all these kinds of things. So we have to kind of like understand all these things in terms of what is the language for. If I am going to say my client has depression, does the client even understand when you tell them depression looks like this? Do they even know what bipolar is? So very, very important. What is our own interpretation of mental health? And that's now up to us now as providers. Whether you're a caseworker, you're an advocate, or you are a police officer, or whatever capacity you are in right now, as you come to this event here today, start thinking much more deeply into understanding what does mental health mean to you, not what you studied. Okay, there's a huge difference, because a lot of times we forget that we are also part of that cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, cultural and religious pieces as we work with our clients. Until we have our own understanding of it, and then marry it with a body of knowledge that we've learned, then we're able to say, okay, if I think of mental health in this respect, then how can I not understand my client who is different from me in terms of culture and religion? If they're seeing a different perspective of what mental health looks like, then I have an obligation to make sure that my client and I build that relationship of understanding and sharing the pieces that they might be shared during that, or they might be shared in the way you put into your treatment plan. But it is very important, I personally believe it's important as mental health, so that the word or the expression is not just used loosely, but we have to have a depth of understanding of what mental health means, not only from what I've read in the books or the classifications, but how I process mental health growing up. Okay, very important, because then your journey to understanding that is also an awareness journey towards understanding the people you would like to serve or you already serve. The impact of language when we talk about mental health, I can not even emphasize that, because it's very, very important. And that is why we need to partner ourselves with local organizations, especially LSN. Raquel is doing an amazing job there, putting staff and recruiting people, having trainings going on for interpretation. Very, very important, because of the specialization that mental health requires. I urge you, I really encourage you to work with trained interpreters, and I hope in the future we will have dialogue about preparing a training manual that's specific to different things. So we have one for the hospitals, but for mental health, I am not sure if it has been developed or it's somewhere in some states, how we can access that, because it's very important for interpreters to know the language, the importance of it, because interpreters are not cultural brokers. Sometimes you find a situation where people want to work with the interpreters in two different roles, and so sometimes it gives you a totally different information. So the point I'm trying to make is that we really need to work towards creating also the language of mental health, so that when we have interpreters trained, they understand the language of mental health. So if, for example, going back to my example, Barbara comes in, she's going on and she's saying, ndashikirwa, and the interpreter is interpreting, oh, it has arrived in messing up with my mind. How do we train our interpreter to understand if there's an expression that is used in general in that community? How do we now help our interpreter also interpret that at least as accurately as they can to you as a provider when they work with you? So very, very important. So I would say let's partner with all the different organizations that are in our community here. LSN is doing an amazing job. I cannot thank you enough, Raquel, for the work that you're doing there. And so cultural comprehension of the language, important, and literacy. They may speak the language, they may speak the English language, but they might not at all understand all these classifications or what mental health is. So let's also not work on assumption or assuming that our clients understand what we're talking about, because for the most part, sometimes they might not even understand some of the stuff you're saying. Being literate in a language does not mean that you are literate in the understanding the context of things. Two different things. And I remember even when I was in school, my English teacher would always say the spoken language and written language are totally two different languages, because when you speak, you can learn to speak and utilize verbs and all these conjugate and so on. But when it comes to writing, if you don't know the concepts of these things, it becomes challenging. So very, very important to have that in place. And of course, impact of religion, again, it's similar to language. We have to make sure that we are understanding what wellness looks like in terms of mental health. And so if a client comes and they are like Barbara and they are Muslim, how do they understand from one, understanding the fact that something is coming and making havoc in my mind, and how is it in line with my religion? Because religion is soul safety, okay? It's soul safety for a lot of religions or a lot of practices that do a lot of stuff with the soul or the spirit. So it's very important to understand the relationship there for the client, not necessarily for you, but understand it, make the effort to understand it from the client's perspective, because it is their wellness at the end of the day. So it's very important to understand that piece from their view of it. And so whether you're working with somebody who is Buddhist, what does that journey look like for them in mental health? Because a lot of times you hear clients talk about an afterlife in Buddhism. So how is that journey when you work with them doing treatment? How is that journey in line with what you are doing? And where do you have this piece where you are walking alongside with them, or they are in front of you during treatment? How does that look like? Making that effort to have those conversations. And how do we include families? Because, and I will be corrected here, coming to the US and having lived here for almost now 12 years or 15, I can't remember how many now. Oh my gosh, I am old. But anyways, the point is, I've come to realize that most aspects of American life is very individualized. And a lot of our clients that come to us are very community-based. They come from collective societies. And so when you are from a collective society, one person is unwell in the home, it means the whole family is unwell. So my recommendation is always, because I had experience where we had a client we were working with, and we were working in partnership with Park Center. And so the client was recommended to take medication for depression and I believe some other pieces that she was struggling with. And so when she got to the family, she explained to them, well, the interpreter, everybody will explain this is, this is medication for a supporter in it and stuff like that. And I think in the language that we might have used or whatever the case may be, the assumption was made that the medication that was given was to be shared. So it was a good thing that it came up while we were there. So I can only imagine if we had left and if they had not had the comfort level to ask us, I cannot even imagine what would have happened then with that treatment. Because the idea of wellness in a collective society is that if I am unwell, even if you have medication for yourself, then I must share with everybody. And it does happen. As much as it sounds like, oh my gosh, these are make-up stories, they are not. For people that I know in the audience right now, who've worked with a lot of the families that we've worked with, they know that some of these things potentially happen, and some of them actually happen, and we see it. And so when we are talking about situations where a client comes to us, and if we are thinking, that's why I was asking us to really look at what mental health really means to us. Because you can look at it from a collective perspective, you can look at it from an individualistic perspective. So if your mindset is from a place of treatment as an individual piece, then it means also the communication that you're going to have with your client is going to be a challenging one, because you want to bring the collectiveness of the way they look at mental health versus how they look at you would look at it from individualistic perspective. So very, very important to be very cognizant of all those things as you work with your clients. So I really want to encourage the piece about family, because religion is all about family. It's not only just the family, but also the neighbors, everyone. So when you talk of collective communities, what it simply means is that my neighbor has to be well, because the neighbor has a part in every part of each individual family in collective societies. So when people come, it doesn't mean that they lose that the collective approach to living together. No, they resettle the same way and they live those lifestyles, because those are the things that they're holding on to when they move to a new place, and more so in a place where individualism is very practiced, especially in the US. So it becomes very challenging for a lot of families that are used to be part of this community. And so when you are treating mental health from that perspective, understand what the community, how it understands mental illness. And I also encourage people to say, have conversations with community leaders. You'll be so amazed with how much information you learn about mental health. We had an older guy who struggled a lot. I don't know what it was he was diagnosed with. And I remember one of the interpreters that I worked with, Minpan, him explaining to me to say, well, he finds soothing in working the gardens or working the vegetables that they were growing behind one of the apartment places. And he literally would sleep in there. And I'm not saying people should sleep out and camp out. But for him, his wellness, you would find in tending, taking care of the gardens, making sure, new vegetables were grown seasonally, and making sure the families had enough vegetables and so on. And it brought some level of wellness, some level of balance in whatever was going on. And so learning from the interpreter, learning pieces through the interpreter, the trauma this old man had experienced, watching his family being killed during the war, and his way of dealing with that was really tending to the vegetables and all the things. And he would fix pretty much anything. He even had almost like an irrigation tool that he had developed there, and he had running literally rainwater gathered in tanks, not tanks as such, but buckets of water that he had put around, and that water was streamlined into the gardens. So his wellness was not your traditional kind of wellness, but it was soothing to him, and it found some kind of balance in managing day-to-day life. Because at the end of the day, what we are saying when we work with our clients with regards to mental health, we want our clients to find a sense of stability in wherever they are, a sense of form of normalcy, I guess, in their everyday life. It might not look normal to us, but as long as they can get to that place where they feel they are functional enough to not feel overwhelmed, then we've really started the journey with our clients of wellness. So very, very important to understand the importance of family and time and everything like that. And so when we talk about our who is here in Fort Wayne, Fort Wayne has become really a melting pot. We have a lot of so many internationals, amazing. There's so much opportunity to learn, indirectly, directly, amazing. So my encouragement is that please do work with the local universities as well. They do have a lot of information about the populations that are here. Catholic Charities is another place where you can go, get information about who are the newcomers now, which populations do we have. Let's make ourselves be part of that community, because you are part of that community. You're part of the Fort Wayne community. You're in Allen County, you are part of Allen County. So if you are part of Allen County, it means also now we have an obligation to be making sure that we interact with our communities that we might not typically communicate with, because at the end of the day, you'll be amazed when you look at it from a holistic perspective like that, looking at community not from just my client over here, but community, my client, family, community, larger society, environment, politics, and so on and so on. You'll be amazed how much things sometimes come to just make sense for you and also your the clients that you're serving. And I'm not going to go through these statistics and also the differences in the different immigrants that we have. But what I would like to touch on is one of the things that I thought was very interesting is my last piece. When we, I came up with this as I was listening to someone, and I've always not liked the idea of somebody saying, we are in the business of people, okay? And so I always wondered, what are you saying? Because when you say that, it's almost like, it sounds very wrong. But then I kind of thought to myself, let me have a different twist to understanding the business of people. What, to me, I kind of created in my mind a different kind of understanding of it. And I said to myself, when I go to a new place, and people will recommend, okay, stay at this place or eat at this place and so on and so on. But I always go on further and look at the stars. And so the 5 stars mean a bunch to me. So if a place is rated a 5-star place, then I'm saying to myself, that's where I want to go. Okay? Not because I'm saying the people with 3 stars or 2 stars, they are not as good. Of course they are not. But the point I'm making is that my choice is based on how much are they prepared to go to make sure the people who come and utilize their services are going to come out of there wowed by wow. And so My challenge to all of you today is that I really would like us to look at ourselves as 5-star gatekeepers of mental health. What that simply means is that for me personally, and you can look at it in a different way, but to me, that means I want when when somebody comes to me, to talk to me about what's going on with them, and you realize, well, this is problem, maybe mental health, I guard jealously this particular client to me, because they are going to come with so much information, so much learning for me. And so the importance of it is that I want them, when they come out of there, I might not give them all the tools they might have, but they are going to give me a 5-star. And it is my job now to make sure that I guard that jealously and say, I am going to, every client I'm going to meet with, I'm going to have them have a 5-star kind of service from me. And so those 5 stars, I've not come up yet with what those 5 stars mean, but they were exciting to me. Just the concept of it, the analogy, just, oh my gosh, it just made me go wild, just to think, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I can actually use that, my hated expression of we are in the business of people. Yes, but if we look at it from a humanistic perspective, in terms of saying, I am going to be the gatekeeper, and I am going to make sure that anyone who passes through me and to deal with mental health or any other kind of situations, I am going to give them a 5-star kind of treatment. So that includes making sure if I am not able to provide services, I'm making the appropriate and needed referral, whether to work with local agencies here, where do I find my resources from, how do I network, how do I get information to learn more about the culture, how do I have this conversation with my client or family for me to understand who they are, their cultures, their religions, and become more and more sensitive. How do I interact with them so that at the end of the day, my evaluation tool is going to be based on their treatment with you versus your tool that fits in what is required of you by the tools that are in the workplace. So again, my encouragement is that let's be 5-star gatekeepers for clients who come with us, because it's not an easy thing. For a lot of our clients, they don't understand what mental health is. I'm not generalizing here, but in most cases, they have no clue what your classifications are. And so when they come to you, they're actually looking for guidance from you. But we have to be the ones to do the piece about engaging them so that they feel that you are not up here and they are down here, but you're simply saying, I am walking alongside with you. Yes, I might have the tools here, but I'm going to be creative with my client, each individual client, not as a whole, but the individual client, her nuclear, their family or their community. How do I get to understand that so that at the end of the day, I am going to get that 5-star from them? Not because you're going to ask them to say, can you rate me? No, that's not the idea of you being rated by clients, but simply you get feedback from the tools that you're also going to create. How do you assess, how do you assess growth in what you've provided to your clients? How do you assess wellness? To what level? And how do the clients see wellness? How do they see growth in their process when you've done services with them? So have tools that are prepared for clients in the languages that they understand, language of mental health that they understand, so that at the end of the day, when you have these evaluations, you are able to say, okay, where are the areas that we need to improve on? What are the areas that we need to encourage our clients to work on, and so on and so on. So creating tools on a regular basis is very vital. I know we have the RHS 15, which is a specific tool for immigrants and for refugees. My recommendation is always, yes, you have the tools that are already through research and so on, but we are also natural observers as human beings. And so if we are really, really intentional in the things that we are seeking in terms of wellness for our clients, we have an obligation also to say, how can we also create tools that might not be an RHS 15, but a tool that speaks to the language of our client in much more detail. Yes, it's very detailed, but we still can continue to build on that. Because the thing is, that is the reason why you find the classifications for different mental health pieces, they are renewed over and over time, because the environment has a lot of influence in a lot of these things. You look at autism, these are mental health pieces that we never knew of probably maybe 15 years ago, but environment has defined some of these things. So we can be part of that process. We might not be professional researchers, but we are very good observers as human beings. We can make that observation to say, what is this, what does this mean? I'm seeing my client is presenting these kinds of situations, and I'm not understanding, and I go to my classification and it's not saying much. How do you deal with that? We can only do it by making sure that we keep good documentation of all that's going on with our clients, and also making sure that we provide the guidance and so on. And so, yes, mental health is really a very deep subject. And so you as a provider, you have a lot of work to do on yourself. And so when I say this is that what I mean is that we also need to have a lot of self-care, okay? Because you have to remember, for you to be well, to work with others, you have to do a lot of introspection as well, do a lot of self-care. So I have a caregiver self-care recipe, okay? It's definitely not going to have any mashed potatoes or greens, sorry. But you can eat those greens as you reflect on a lot of things. Have self-knowledge, because this you can do in your safe space. You don't have to do it in the group that we are in right now, because we're not going to ask you to do those kinds of things. But these are things you can do in the safety of your own home, and that safe environment we talked about in the objectives. Self-examination, what does that mean? Look at some of the stereotypical attitudes that we grew up with, in terms of how we perceive others to be, compared to ourselves, the language that we use, and so on and so on. Do this whole piece by yourself. That these things you might not realize, a lot of times they might even hinder the relationship that is preferable when you work with your clients. And again, you're working with clients who are coming from diverse places, culturally, linguistically, religiously, and so on and so on. And so if we don't address some of these stereotypical attitudes we grew up with, then it means then we are going to have a lot of hindrance, a lot of clashing of battle of religions and cultures, because it's going against what you probably believe in. But if we start having those pieces and really look at ourselves and examine some of those things, and then start the journey of saying, you know what, I need to clean my own basement here before I can start to think, why is client not making, because there has to be a reason. If a client is not making the progress that you would like for them to be making, you have to do a lot of introspection to say, are there some of the things that I might have that might be hindering this relationship? Because sometimes even in a simple word in your communication, it might throw off a client to a place where they might not build a relationship with you. So again, looking at all those things are very important. Resourcing, partnering with agencies whose missions are in line with serving underserved populations. And I know we have quite a lot in the audience. Hey, everyone there. I know all of you are part of that whole group of agencies that work together. And then self-care strategies. This must be intentional. You have to think of what are those things, the places you go to in your mind, okay, where you really declutter. It's very important for you to do that, because obviously you're not going to declutter everything, but a lot of times if you're overwhelmed and you have so much clutter in your own head as a provider, and somebody comes with their mental health pieces, the likelihood of cluttering to them, projecting to them, is likely. So it's very, very important to make sure we are aware of these things that might not consciously come to us, but subconsciously are just there. And then sometimes in the way you communicate with the client, it comes off. And then probably if you are quick to realize that, good for you. But sometimes people might not even be able to even realize what has just happened, that you've just decluttered your own clutter and projected it to a client. So very, very important to look at that. And plan on re-entering. I like this one. It's from a writer I like very much. Plan for re-entering a normal life. So what it means is that, because you deal with such heavy stuff, as mental health providers, it means also sometimes we can carry the load of our clients, because those stories can really become so burdening to the heart, and because there's some stories are just so horrific. You cannot even believe that somebody has gone through this much suffering and they still come out strong and smiling. And so sometimes we carry that weight on us. So it's very, very important to take care of that piece in terms of thinking of your own self-care. Very, very important. And so as a final thought, Arlene is going to do the scenarios with you if there's time. If there's not, I'm hoping that the team at the MCC are going to plan for another conference, and I hope we're going to have these dialogues more and more. We really need to continue to have these dialogues, and it doesn't have to be in conference. We can have tea, coffee shop kind of conversations anywhere, just so at least people get to be involved in these kinds of conversations on a daily basis, and you can measure personal growth and growth in the way you're also providing treatment. So it's very, very important, very, very important to have this. And so as a final thought to everybody, my piece is always to say, we may never be part of any part of a community, but we have an obligation to learn. Because when you are part of a diverse community, it's not by chance that we are created diverse. Okay, I always say this, and I did say this at one of my presentations I did last night, is that diversity is like drinking water and air, because diversity is not a biological invention or scientific invention. This is creation as it came to us. We were created with all these things and practices that we have, and the idea of it is to learn and learn from each other and feed off each other in that respect. And so if we take that idea of feeding off each other, and when we are working towards finding wellness for our community, my community, your community, and everybody's community, we should be those 5-star gatekeepers, because it's very, very important for us to be able to provide our clients with the best service. And so when they do in their mind or wherever they are, when they are done with you, your journey with you, they are able to say, oh my gosh, this was 5-star treatment that I got. So very, very important. And I just hope that all of you continue to do the amazing work that you do in the community. There's no money enough to pay how much you do. And I appreciate all the work that everybody does, and people just coming together to learn and be part of this whole piece about wellness, because it is about wellness. It is about community life. It is about love and connection, my neighbor, my nurse, all the things that we spoke about at the beginning. And so I will see you later, and hopefully I would not have lost my voice. So technology has been very wonderful. So I'm so grateful to be able to bring this piece of my presentation to you through technology. Thank you.